brother, what I love for myself, only Allah do I worship and asking for help. Every day, 5 times must I always pray. I am proud to be a Muslim now. Everyone say, La ilaha.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you and your families and your neighbors and your friends. And may Allah keep giving you. Today's episode is about attitude. Attitude is everything, we're saying. Attitude is everything. Could you imagine somebody approached you for help? You had a negative attitude. Can you imagine if you thought to yourself, no matter what you do, you can't change your problem? What do you think is going to happen to your behaviors? Now, keep in mind, some problems are extremely difficult to change. Extremely. But something that I've learned from working in a youth prison with youth who have committed murder, rape, serious habitual offenders, some on a clear path to becoming a criminal, some major signs of psychopathy, when we say psychopath, incurable. But I learned something from my supervisor there. I was training, I was learning, I was building my own skills with some of the most severe issues, pathology, you name it, it's all there. And I learned, nobody's perfect, but nobody's hopeless either. Some are really, really, really close. Nobody's hopeless. That's the attitude of a helper. That's the attitude of a Muslim. You always have to have hope. Am I correct? If I was to ask you, give me a verse in the Quran that contributes to the concept of having hope, every single one can answer. There's several. When we talk about hope, ar-raja, we hope. And hope is a thought process, along with an emotional process, along with a spiritual process. And it all impacts our behaviors. Because if you have the right attitude, you're going to be on the right path to achieving your goals. You know, we've been talking a lot about micro skills, dealing with individuals, relationship building, husn al-khuluq and husn al-dhan, good opinion. I'd like to just take a moment and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be grateful to Allah. We have husn al-dhan with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a khuluq, a relationship, manners that we should have with Allah the Almighty. A lot of times we forget that. Listen to this verse. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. And if my servant asks you concerning me, okay? So think of the context of this verse. Now, there's a lot of scholars and speakers who do a wonderful job of explaining the tafsir. For me, I just want to remind you to go out and listen. Hear, what is the tafsir of this ayah? And if my servant asks you concerning me, God, Allah the Almighty, communicating with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, this verse. And if my servant, you, every single one of us, is a servant of Allah, whether we like it or not. If my servant asks you concerning me. So you're asking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response? فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. I am near. Nothing between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the attitude. Allah is always near. But why is it that sometimes we feel that Allah is far away from us? Because of our attitude. we've disconnected from Allah. Allah is always near. That's not going to change. فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. I answer the call. What you're asking for Allah, Allah's answering. If you ask. So we got to think about the attitude of asking for help from Allah. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So let them listen to my call. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call? To you, in your daily life, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call? What are the things that you need to be doing that you're not doing? And what's blocking you from doing it? What's blocking you from enjoying life? From being comfortable? From having peace in life? From increasing your resources? What is preventing you from that? Once you identify that, you've started the process of finding a solution. In order to find a solution, you need to identify the problem. What is the problem? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So that they may be successful. Walk the right path. Take that right journey towards success. So, our problems need to be identified. We need to get right with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once we identify the problem, whether it's a spiritual one, whether it's an emotional problem, anger, stress, those feelings inside of us, whether it's a psychological problem, irrational thinking, or always having negative opinions of others. Maybe it's a social problem. Just can't get along. Or perhaps a behavioral issue. You just keep engaging in those sins over and over again. You just keep engaging in that counterproductive behavior. You just keep engaging in unhealthy behaviors. Whatever the problem is, we need to identify it clearly. But as we start to identify the problem, we have to pause for a second and ask the question, from what perspective? From what attitude? From what worldview are we viewing this problem? Is it based on a faulty assumption? A faulty schema? Is it based on some sort of irrational thoughts? Is it based on evidence? What is it based on? Because our worldview will impact how we take the next steps. If you see the problem as a religious issue, then what's your solution going to be?
An issue from Islam.
At an Islamic perspective. If you see the issue as a psychological issue, then you're going to take a psychological perspective. Within psychology, there are several perspectives. Several. Psychologists identify, or the theories in psychology, they identify human functioning differently. They identify the sources of problems differently. They identify the treatment plan differently. So which perspective are you going to take? Because you can't start with one, and then when you come to a problem, you switch. It's very difficult to do that. Because if you assume that the problem has something to do with the person's physiological makeup, meaning genetics or chemical imbalance, then you're going to be prescribing medication, you're going to be doing different stuff. You can't all of a sudden stop and say, no, let's switch to talk therapy. Sometimes they use these interventions together in certain therapies, but it's got to be based on evidence. It's got to be based on something. It can't just be, go for it. If you don't have the right tools, as we saw with the apples, you can really damage. You can cause a lot of damage. Or you could be ineffective. Or you could just, you know what, not do anything at all. So we got to be very careful that you're starting off with the right attitude, the right worldview. Make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So, you can either see the person terms of problems, you can see them as a problematic person. That's it. This person has issues. He's got problems. But I advise you, if you're not a professional helper, not to do that. I advise you to take a solution-focused approach, where you're focusing on the person's strengths. You're trying to identify their strengths rather than their weaknesses. Because even drug addicts are not drug addicts 24 hours a day. People are not an embodiment of their problem. They have behavioral issues, emotional issues, psychological issues, spiritual issues. People are not worthless. All people have hope. That's an attitude. The behavior might be the problem. The thinking might be the problem. The feelings might be the problem. Their connection to God might be the problem. You need to start identifying the problem, but you need to focus on the strengths of the individual. Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll see you after the break, inshallah, as we begin our journey into Sunnah-infused counseling. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you all, and your families, and everybody around you. Attitude. And your approach to counseling is what we want to complete this session with. Okay? Parents often come to me and they've got problems with their children. You know, as much as I would love to take the parent's side, it gets really difficult sometimes. Some youth have approached me and said, I got an 89% on my exam and I got grounded. My parents said, where's the other 11%? Right? Sometimes we're so focused on the problem, we forget about the strengths. If you got a child who's praying, be happy. Focus on that. Not everybody learns through being punished. Okay? Let me repeat that. Not everybody learns through being punished. In fact, research is very clear that positive reinforcement, if there's a behavior that you want to see more of, reward it and ignore the bad behavior. But you got to start when they're children. I have a 2-year-old son, right? And he's jumping all around everywhere. You know what? I tell my wife, there's a university student right there. You know why? Because he's not playing. He's learning. Learning about life, learning about the environment. If he gets punished for learning, what do you think is going to happen when he gets to 7th grade? Think he's going to like school? He's learning. He's in his own little university right now. So these children, they play and they replay. And that's how they learn. Attitude. You could look at a child jumping up and down and say, wow, mashallah. See my son, he's studying. All the time he's studying, right? Or you can look at your child playing video games and say, wow, mashallah, he's really developing his critical thinking skills. And of course, it depends on what game he's playing. So, attitude is everything. You can reframe things. You can find the strengths in your children. You can find the strengths in your friends, in those people that come and help you. It's not hard. But if you're not looking for it, then it's impossible. I want to explore this verse in the Quran just very briefly, because a lot of times people get so frustrated with their children or with their family or their friends because we see so much potential, or we see the person going down a path that we know is going to lead to destruction. We know it's going to ruin their lives. And we try to stop them, but we don't want to interfere because we believe everybody should have freedom of choice and they can do what they want. Especially when children get to an age where what parents say doesn't even matter anymore. Those are other issues that we'll talk about when we get to community development, because parents need help with their children. But let's focus on that grief, that difficulty, right? And you want to overcome the grief of this parent. You want to help them deal with their children a little better. Brother Nabil, can you recite that verse for us, please?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذي قال لوالديه أف لكما أتعدانني أن أخرج وقد خلت القرون من قبلي وهما يستغيثان الله.
Stop. ويلك آمن. That's the next verse. ويلك آمن. This young boy, young man, whoever this is telling his parents, أف لكما. Who do you guys think you are? He's insulting his parents. You want me to believe? You want me to believe? You want me to change the way I'm living? You want me to do something different? Insert your own problem there. You want me to change my problem? And you want me to believe now? And his parents are so frustrated. They say, وَيْلَكَ آمِن. Woe to you! You have to believe. What's wrong with you, son? This is a cry of love, not a cry of hate. Woe to you! A lot of times parents get really upset with their children and they say hurtful things out of love. No parent hates their child. At least that's not how it begins. But something happens along the way. Relationships get destroyed. People stop loving one another. At what point did we stop loving our own children? At what point did that connection get severed? At what point did silatul rahim start to deteriorate? We need to explore, what is our attitude? Like I said, no one's hopeless and no one's perfect. Our attitude, we need to start learning how to manage with the weaknesses of our family, friends, children, those around us, and start to identify the strengths. A lot of times, we have something called cognitive distortions. The way we think is so polarized, right? It's either this or that. Either you pray 5 times a day, you pray Qiyam Layl, you do everything and you obey us and you listen to everything we say, or else you're a bad son. You've set the expectations so high, it's going to lead to inevitable disappointment. Rather, we should start thinking more rationally. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving, because we always make mistakes. A lot of times when we think all or nothing, either or, we forget that there's other options, right? It's either 0 or 100%, when in fact, neither one of these exists. Al-kamalu lillah, the perfection is only for Allah. Only Allah is perfect, subhanallah. And nobody's hopeless. This is the attitude of the believer. When we think only in either or, we forget that there's a both and. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَن يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا. Nothing will happen to us that Allah hasn't already written. See, people are not disturbed by events. They're disturbed by the perception of that event. What goes on in our mind, how we attribute the cause of that event. That's what bothers us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. You're going to be tested. There's going to be fear. There's going to be loss. You're going to have anxiety, stress. You're going to have problems. But give glad tidings to those who are patient. Those who, when a calamity approaches and they say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You know, there's a final story that I'd like to end with. Ahmad ibn Hanbal. You know the name. Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Great scholar in Islam. He used to travel a lot. One day he was in a mosque. And they closed the mosque at night. Security reasons, whatever. Anyways, this security guard comes around.
He says, we're closing the mosque, get out. Okay, so Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he says, look, I'm a Abas Sabil, like, come on. I'm away, you gotta let me stay. Now remember, there was no Facebook or Twitter. They couldn't check online, Google his name and say, oh yeah, you're Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They couldn't do that. You know that. But Ahmad ibn Hanbal didn't say, do you know who I am? His attitude was different. So he says, fine. The security guard says, no, get out. So Ahmad ibn Hanbal goes and sits on the stairs. Security guard comes around, sees him on the stairs. Didn't I tell you to leave? A baker sees this. And he goes, brings him to his shop. He's a baker. So he's working all night. He says, you know what? You could spend the night here. Still, Ahmad ibn Hanbal doesn't say, I'm Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Get my agent on the line. He's grateful. Attitude, attitude, attitude. The baker starts to work. And the baker continuously, subhanAllah, he's constantly remembering Allah. All night. All night he's remembering Allah. And so, Ahmad ibn Hanbal asks, he's amazed. He says, how long have you been doing this for? How long have you been remembering Allah? He says, since as long as I can remember. And so Ahmad ibn Hanbal asks, is there anything, are you receiving something special from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The man says, I've never asked Allah for something except that He gave it to me. Let's pause there for a second. Sort of like our lives. Most of us have received everything we want from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But our attitude, not there. And so, he says, except for one thing. Except for one thing. To see Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Next episode, we'll continue with this story. But remember, my dear brothers and sisters, attitude is everything. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I only love for my brother what I love for myself.